Alright, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's settle in, get comfortable, grab our books, and get ready to jump back in where we left off. Welcome back. This is our third night of reading from Righto, Jeeves. It's been a lot of fun so far. It's been a nice change of pace. A reminder that comedy is every bit as valid as a hoity-toity lit. So, yeah, how will Birdie ruin everything tonight? So far, everything is already going to shit. However, there is still time for things to get worse. We're about halfway through the book, and I really don't expect Jeeves to solve everything until the last few chapters. So, we can sit down and enjoy the chaos as Birdie finds new and creative ways to ruin his friends' and family's lives. It's an interesting way to think of it. But yes, despite everything, even though he is actually somewhat despicable, I can't bring myself to dislike Birdie. He's a likable idiot. It probably helps that we know there's the safety net of Jeeves back behind things. And he's not malicious. He's terribly self-centered, but in a charming way, I guess? It's hard to tell, really. It's just fun. I'm enjoying this book a whole lot, and I hope you guys are too. So, let's get back into it. We want to get to about the 3/4 mark, which I think lines up nicely with the start of chapter 19. So we've got about 5 chapters to get through tonight, and that'll leave us with a clear off-ramp for tomorrow to finish up on schedule. So, let's go ahead and dive back in with chapter 14 of Righto, Jeeves. Investigation proved that the friends Angela had gone to spend the day with were some stately home owners of the name of Stretchley Bud, hanging out in a joint called Kingham Manor, about 8 miles distant in the direction of Pershore. I didn't know these birds, but their fascination must have been considerable, for she tore herself away from them only just in time to get back and dress for dinner. It was, accordingly, not until coffee had been consumed that I was able to get matters moving. I found her in the drawing room and at once proceeded to put things in train. It was with very different feelings from those which had animated the bosom when approaching the Bassett 24 hours before in the same manner, in this same drawing room, that I headed for where she sat. As I had told Tuppy, I have always been devoted to Angela, and there is nothing I like better than a ramble in her company, and I could see by the look of her now how sorely in need she was of my aid and comfort. Frankly, I was shocked by the unfortunate young prune's appearance. At Cannes, she had been a happy, smiling English girl of the best type, full of beans and buck. Her face now was pale and drawn, like that of a hockey centre-forward at a girls' school who, in addition to getting a fruity one on the shin, has just been penalised for sticks. In any normal gathering, her demeanour would have excited instant remark, for the standard of gloom at Brinkley Court has become so high that it passed unnoticed. Indeed, I shouldn't wonder if Uncle Tom, crouched in his corner, wanting for the end, didn't think she was looking indecently cheerful. I got down to the agenda in my debonair way. What ho, Angela, old girl? Hello, Bertie, darling. Glad to see you back at last. I missed you. Did you, darling? I did indeed. Care for some saunter? I'd love it. Fine. I have much to say to you that is not for the public ear. I think at this moment poor Tuppy must have got a sudden touch of cramp. He had been sitting hard by, staring at the ceiling, and now he gave a sharp leap, like a gaffed salmon, and upset a small table containing a vase, a bowl of potpourri, 2 china dogs, and a copy of Omar Khayyam bound in limp leather. Aunt Dahlia uttered a startled hunting cry. Uncle Tom, who probably imagined from the noise that this was civilization crashing at last, helped things along by breaking a coffee cup. Tuppy said he was sorry. Aunt Dahlia, with a deathbed groan, said it didn't matter, and Angela, having stared haughtily for a moment like a princess of the old regime, confronted by some notable example of gaucherie on the part of some particularly foul member of the underworld, accompanied me across the threshold. And presently, I had deposited her and self on one of the rustic benches in the garden, and was ready to snap into the business of the evening. I considered it best, however, before doing so, to ease things along with a little informal chit-chat. You don't want to rush a delicate job like the one I had in hand. And so, for a while, we spoke of neutral topics. She said that what had kept her so long at Stretch-the-Bud's was that Hilda Stretch-the-Bud had made her stop on and help with the arrangements for their servants' ball tomorrow night, a task which she couldn't very well decline, as all the Brinkley Court domestic staff were to be present. I said that a jolly night's revelry might be just what was needed to cheer Anatole up and take his mind off things, to which she replied that Anatole wasn't going. On being urged to do so by Aunt Dahlia, she said he had merely shaken his head sadly and gone on talking of returning to Provence, where he was appreciated. It was after the sombre silence induced by this statement that Angela said the grass was wet, and she thought she would go in. This, of course, was entirely foreign to my policy. No, don't do that. I haven't had a chance to talk to you since you arrived. I shall ruin my shoes. Put your feet up on my lap. All right, and you can tickle my ankles. Quite. Matters were accordingly arranged on these lines, and for some minutes we continued chatting in desultory fashion. Then the conversation petered out. I made a few observations in regards to the scenic effects, featuring the twilight hush, the peeping stars, the soft glimmer of the waters of the lake, and she said yes. Something rustled in the bushes in front of us, and I advanced the theory that it was possibly a weasel, and she said it might be, but it was plain and the girl was distrait, and I considered it best to waste no more time. Well, old thing, I said, I've heard all about your little dust-up. Those wedding bells are not going to ring out, what? No. Definitely over, is it? Yes. Well, if you want my opinion, I think that it's a bit of a goose for you, Angela, old girl. I think you're extremely well out of it. It's a mystery to me how you stood this glossop for so long. Take him for all in all, he ranks very low down among the wines and spirits. A washout, I should describe him as. A frightful oik, and a mass of side to boot. I pity the girl who is linked for life to a bargee like Tuppy Glossop. And I emitted a hard laugh, one of the sneering kind. I always thought you were such friends, said Angela. I let out another hard one, with a bit more topspin on it than the first time. Friends? Absolutely not. One was civil, of course, when one met with a fellow, but it would be absurd to say one was a friend of his. A club acquaintance, and a mere one at that, and then one was at school with the man. At Hatton? Good heavens, no! We shouldn't have a fellow like that at Hatton. That's at a kid's school before I went there. A grubby little brute he was, I recollect, covered with ink and mire generally, washing only on alternate Thursdays. In short, a notable outsider, shunned by all. I paused. I was more than a bit perturbed, apart from the agony of having to talk in the fashion of one who, except when he was looping back rings and causing me to plunge into swimming baths in correct evening costume, had always been a very dear and esteemed crony. I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. Business was not resulting. Staring into the bushes without a yip, she appeared to be bearing these slurs and innuendos of mine with an easy calm. I had another pop at it. Uncouth about it sums it up. I doubt I've ever seen an uncouther kid than this Glossop. Ask anyone who knew him in those days to describe him in a word, and the word they will use is uncouth. And he's just the same today. It's the same old story. The boy is the father of the man. She appeared not to have heard. The boy, I repeated, not wishing her to miss that one, is the father of the man. What are you talking about? I'm talking about this Glossop. I thought you said something about somebody's father. I said the boy was the father of the man. What boy? The boy Glossop. He hasn't got a father. I never said he had. I said he was the father of the boy, or rather, of the man. What man? I saw that the conversation had reached a point where, unless care was taken, we should be muddled. The point I'm trying to make, I said, is that the boy Glossop is the father of the man Glossop. In other words, each loathsome fault and blemish that led the boy Glossop to be frowned upon by his fellows is present in the man Glossop, and causes him, I am speaking now of the man Glossop, to be a hissing and a byword at places like the Drones, where certain standard of decency is demanded from the inmates. Ask anyone at the Drones, and they will tell you that it was a black day for the dear old club when this chap Glossop somehow wriggled into the list of members. Here, you will find a man who dislikes his face. There, one who could stand his face if it wasn't for his habits. But the universal consensus of opinion is that the fellow is a bounder and a tick, and that the moment he showed signs of wanting to get into the place, he should have been met with the firm nol prosequi and heartily blackballed. I had to pause again here, partly in order to take in a spot of breath, and partly to wrestle with the almost physical torture of saying these frightful things about poor old Tuppy. I guess this is a good time for me to catch my breath. Thank you. Thank you, Bertie. There are some chaps, I resumed, forcing myself once more to the nauseous task, who, in spite of looking as if they had slept in their clothes, can get by quite nicely because they are amiable and suave. There are others who, for all they excite adverse comment by being fat and uncouth, find themselves on the credit side of the ledger, owing to their wit and sparkling humour. But this Glossop, I regret to say, falls into neither class. In addition to looking like one of those things that come out of hollow trees, he is universally admitted to be a dumb brick of the first water, no soul, no conversation. In short, any girl who, having been rash enough to get engaged to him, has managed at the 11th hour to slide out, is justly entitled to consider herself dashed lucky. I paused once more, and cocked an eye at Angela to see how the treatment was taking. All the while I'd been speaking, she had sat gazing silently into the bushes. But it seemed to me incredible that she should not now turn on me like a tigress, according to specifications. It beat me why she hadn't done it already. It seemed to me that a mere tithe of what I had said, if said to a tigress about a tiger of which she was fond, would have made her, the tigress I mean, hit the ceiling. And the next moment you could have knocked me down with a toothpick. Yes, she said, nodding thoughtfully. You're quite right. Eh? That's exactly what I've been thinking myself. What? Dumb brick. It just describes him. One of the 6 silliest asses in England, I should think he must be. I did not speak. I was endeavouring to adjust the faculties which were in urgent need of a bit of first-aid treatment. I mean to say, all this had come as a complete surprise. In formulating the well-laid plans which I had just been putting into effect, the one contingency I had not budgeted for was that she might adhere to the sentiments which I expressed. I had braced myself for a gush of stormy emotion. I was expecting the tearful ticking off, the girlish recriminations, and all the rest of the bag of tricks along those lines. But this cordial agreement with my remarks I had not foreseen, and it gave me what you might call pause for thought. Oh yes, Bertie pausing for thought. She proceeded to develop her theme, speaking in ringing, enthusiastic tones as if she loved the topic. Jeeves could tell you the word I want. I think it's ecstatic. Unless that's the sort of rash you get on your face and have to use ointment for. But if that is the right word, then that's what her manner was, as she ventilated the subject of poor old Tuppy. If you've been able to go simply by the sound of her voice, she might have been a court poet cutting loose about an oriental monarch, or Gussie Fignotle describing his last consignment of newts. It's so nice, Bertie, talking to someone who really takes a sensible view about this man Glossop. Mother says he's a good chap, which is simply absurd. Anybody can see that he's absolutely impossible. He's conceited and opinionative and argues all the time. And even when he knows perfectly well what he's talking through his hat, and he smokes too much, and eats too much, and drinks too much. And I don't like the colour of his hair. Not that he'll have any hair in a year or two, because he's pretty thin on top already, and before he knows where he is, he'll be as bald as an egg. He's the last man who could afford to go bald. And I think it's simply disgusting, the way he gorges all the time. Do you know, I found him in the larder at 1 o'clock this morning, absolutely wallowing in a steak and kidney pie. There was hardly any of it left. But you remember what an enormous dinner he had. Quite disgusting, I call it. But I can't stop out here all night, talking about men who aren't worth wasting a word on, and haven't even had sense enough to tell sharks from flatfish. I'm going in. And, gathering about her slim shoulders the shawl which she had put on as protection against the evening dew, she buzzed off, leaving me alone in the silent night. Well, as a matter of fact, not absolutely alone, because a few moments later there was a sort of upheaval in the bushes in front of me, and Tuppy emerged. That is the end of chapter 14. So, this went about as well as we could expect. The original plan to badmouth Tuppy and rekindle the sort of protective instincts that Angela might have had backfired spectacularly, both by Tuppy being in earshot, causing, all of the particularly extravagant insults to carry on the wind. And the somewhat incriminating posture that they'd found themselves in on the bench. Oh yes, don't worry. I'll keep you safe from the dew, but just put your feet in my lap. Tickle your ankles. Yeah, that's absolutely innocent. Perfect cousinly behavior. Birdie. Birdie, 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 birdie. You're not that much of an aristocrat that this sort of cousinly interaction is accepted. Blood's not quite that thick, old chap. Alright, well, let's see how this next interaction plays out, because I am rather positive that Tuppy is not going to be very happy with how this goes out. I think in general company, second cousins are as close as you can get to being remotely acceptable. You get much closer than that and things get icky squicky. We're not going through Genji again. Alright, chapter 15. I gave him the eye. The evening had begun to draw in a bit by now, and the visibility, in consequence, was not so hot, but there still remained ample light to enable me to see him clearly. And what I saw convinced me that I should be a lot easier in my mind with a stout rustic bench between us. I rose accordingly, modelling my style on that of a rocketing pheasant, and proceeded to deposit myself on the other side of the object named. My prompt agility was not without its effect. He seemed somewhat taken aback. He came to a halt, and for about the space of time required to allow for a bead of perspiration to trickle from the top of the brow to the tip of the nose, stood gazing at me in silence. "So," he said at length, and it came as a complete surprise to me that fellows ever really do say "so." I had always thought it was just a thing you read in books, like quotha, I mean to say, or odds bodkins, or even kaboom. Still, there it was. Quaint or not quaint, bizarre or not bizarre, he had said so. And it was up to me to cope with the situation on those lines. It would have been a duller man than Bertram Wooster who had failed to note that the dear old chap was a bit steamed up. Whether his eyes were actually shooting forth flame I couldn't tell you, but there appeared to me to be a distinct incandescence. For the first, his fists were clenched, his ears quivering, and the muscles of his jaw rotating rhythmically, as if they were making an early supper off something. His hair was full of twigs, and there was a beetle hanging from the side of his head, which would have interested Gussie Fink-Nortle. To this, however, I paid scant attention. There is a time for studying beetles, and a time for not studying beetles. "So," he said again. Now, those who know Bertram Wooster best will tell you that he is always at his shrewdest and most level-headed in moments of peril. Who was it who, when gripped by the arm of the law on a boat race night not so many years ago and hauled off to Vine Street Police Station, assumed, in a flash, the identity of Eustace H. Plimsoll of the Laburnums, Allen Road, West Dulwich, thus saving the grand old name of Wooster from being dragged in the mire and avoiding wide publicity of the wrong sort? Who was it? But I need not labour the point. My record speaks for itself. 3 times pinched, but never once sentenced under the correct label. Ask anyone at the drones about this. So now, in a situation threatening to become every moment more scaly, I did not lose my head. I preserved the old sang-froid, smiling a genial and affectionate smile, and hoping that it wasn't too dark for it to register, I spoke with a jolly cordiality. "Why, hello, Tuppy. You here?" He said yes, he was here. "Been here long?" "I have." "Fine. I wanted to see you." "Well, here I am. Come out from behind that bench." No thanks, old man. I like leaning on it. It seems to rest the spine." "In about 2 seconds," said Tuppy, "I'm going to kick your spine up through the top of your head." I raised the eyebrows. Not much good, of course, in that light, but it seemed to help the general composition. "Is this Hildebrand Glossop speaking?" I said. He replied that it was, adding that if I wanted to make sure, I might move a few feet over in his direction. He also called me an opprobrious name. I raised the eyebrows again. "Oh, come, Tuppy. Don't let us use this little chat become acrid. Is acrid the right word I want?" "I couldn't say," he replied, beginning to sidle round the bench. I saw that anything I might wish to say must be said quickly. Already he had sidled some 6 feet, and though, by dint of sidling too, I had managed to keep the bench between us, who could predict how long this happy state of affairs would last? I came to the point, therefore. I think I know what's on your mind, Tuppy, I said. If you were in those bushes during my conversation with the recent Angela, I dare say you heard what I was saying about you. I did. I see. Well, we won't go into the ethics of the thing, eavesdropping, some people might call it, and I can imagine stern critics drawing in the breaths to some extent. Considering it, I don't want to hurt your feelings, Tuppy, but considering it un-English. A bit un-English, Tuppy, old man, you must admit. I'm Scotch. Really? I said. I never knew that before. Rummy how you don't suspect a man of being Scotch unless he's macked something and says, oh, aye, and things like that. I wonder. I went on, feeling that an academic discussion on some neutral topic might ease the tension. I wonder if you can tell me something that has puzzled me a good deal. What exactly is it that they put into haggis? I've often wondered about that. From the fact that his only response to the question was to leap over the bench and make a grab at me, I gathered that his mind was not on haggis. However, I said, leaping over the bench in my turn, that is a side issue. If, to come back to it, you were in those bushes and heard what I was saying about you. He began to move around the bench in a northeasterly direction. I followed his example, setting a course south-southwest. No doubt you were surprised at the way I was talking. Not a bit. What? Did something strike you as odd in the tone of my remarks? It was just the sort of stuff I should have expected a treacherous, sneaking hound like you to say. My dear chap, I protested. This is not your usual form. A bit slow on the uptake, surely. I should have thought you would have spotted right away that it was all part of a well-laid plan. I'll get you in a jiffy, said Tuppy, recovering his balance after a swift clutch at my neck. And so probable did this seem that I delayed no longer, but hastened to place all the facts before him. Speaking rapidly and keeping moving, I related my emotions on receipt of Aunt Dahlia's telegram, my instant rush to the scene of the disaster, my meditations in the car, and the eventual framing of this well-laid plan of mine. I spoke clearly and well, and it was with considerable concern, consequently, that I heard him observe, between clenched teeth, which made it worse, that he didn't believe a damned word of it. But Tuppy, I said, why not? To me the thing rings true to the last drop. What makes you so sceptical? Confide in me, Tuppy. He halted and stood, taking a breather. Tuppy, pungently, though Angela might have argued to the contrary, isn't really fat. During the winter months, you will find him constantly booting the football with merry shouts, and in the summer the tennis racket is seldom out of his hand. But at the recently concluded evening meal, feeling no doubt that after that painful scene in the larder there was nothing to be gained by further abstinence, he had rather let himself go, and, as it were, made up leeway. And after really immersing himself in one of Anatole's dinners, a man of his sturdy build tends to lose elasticity a bit. During the exposition of my plans for his happiness, a certain animation had crept into his round and round the mulberry bush jamboree of ours. So much so, indeed, that for the last few minutes we might have been a rather oversized greyhound and a somewhat slimmer electric hare doing their stuff on a circular track for the entertainment of the many-headed. This, it appeared, had taken it out of him a bit, and I was not displeased. I was feeling the strain myself, and welcomed a lull. It absolutely beats me why you don't believe it, I said. You know, we've been pals for years. You must be aware that, except for the moment when you caused me to do a nosedive into the drone swimming path, an incident which I long since decided to put out of my mind and let the past bury its dead about, if you follow. What I mean, except on that one occasion, as I say, I have always regarded you with the utmost esteem. Why, then, if not for the motives I have outlined, should I knock you to Angela? Answer me that. Be very careful. What do you mean, be very careful? Well, as a matter of fact, I didn't quite know myself. It was what the magistrate had said to me on the occasion when I stood at the dock as Eustace Plimsoll of the Laburnums. And as it had impressed me a good deal at the time, I just bunged it in now by way of giving the conversation a tone. All right. Never mind about being careful, then. Just answer me the question. Why, if I had not your interest sincerely at heart, should I have ticked you off as stated? A sharp spasm shook him from base to apex. The beetle, which during the recent exchanges had been clinging to his head, hoping for the best, gave it up at this and resigned office. It shot off and was swallowed in the night. Ah, I said, your beetle, I explained. No doubt you were unaware of it, but all this while there has been a beetle of sorts parked on the side of your head, and you have now dislodged it. He snorted. Beetles. Not beetles. One beetle only. like your crust, cried Tuppy, vibrating like one of Gussie's newts during the courting season. Talking of beetles when all the time you know you're a treacherous, sneaking hound. It was a despicable point, of course. Why treacherous, sneaking hounds should be considered ineligible to talk about beetles, and I dare say a good cross-examining counsel would have made quite a lot of it. But I let it go. And that's the second time you called me that, and, I said firmly, I insist on an explanation. I have told you that I acted throughout from the best and kindliest motives in roasting you to Angela. It cut me to the quick to have to speak like that, and only the recollection of our lifelong friendship would have made me do it. And now, you say you don't believe me, and call me names for which I am not sure I couldn't have you up before a beak and jury, and mulct you in a very substantial damages. I should have to consult my solicitor, of course, but it would surprise me very much if an action did not lie. Be reasonable, Tuppy. Suggest another motive I could have had, just one. I will. Do you think I don't know? You're in love with Angela yourself. What? And you knocked me in order to poison her mind against me and finally remove me from your path. I had never heard anything so absolutely loopy in my life. Why, David, I've known Angela since she was so high. If you don't fall in love with close relations you've known since they were so high, besides, isn't there something in the book that rules about a man may not marry his cousin? Or am I thinking of grandmothers? Okay, so Bertie has a sensible head on his shoulders. He's just denser than week-old bread. Understandable. Okay. Saves things a little bit. We're not in a Genji situation, we're just in an idiot situation. Tuppy, my dear old ass, I cried. This is pure banana oil. You've come unscrewed. Oh, yes, me, in love with Angela. Ha ha ha! You can't get off with it with ha-has. She called you darling. I know, and I disapproved. This habit of the younger generation of scattering darlings about like birdseed is one that I deprecate. Lax is how I should describe it. You tickled her ankles. In a purely cousinly spirit. It didn't mean a thing. Why, dash it, you must know that in deeper and truer sense I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole. Oh, and why not? Not good enough for you? You misunderstand me, I hastened to reply. When I said I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole, I intend merely to convey that my feelings for her are those of distant, though cordial esteem. In other words, you may rest assured that between this young prune and myself there never has been and never could be any sentiment warmer and stronger than that of ordinary friendship. I believe it was you who tipped her off that I was in the larder last night, so that she could find me there with that pie, thus damaging my prestige. My dear Tuppy, a Wooster? I was shocked. You think a Wooster would do that? He breathed heavily. Listen, he said. It's no good standing there arguing. You can't get away from the facts. Somebody stole her from me at Cannes. You told me yourself that she was with you all the time at Cannes and hardly saw anybody else. You gloated over the mixed bathing and those moonlight walks you had together. Not gloated, just mentioned them. So now you understand why, as soon as I can get you clear of this damned bench, I am going to tear you limb from limb. Why, they have these bally benches in gardens, said Tuppy discontentedly, is more than I can see. They only get in the way. He ceased, and, grabbing out, missed me by a hair's breadth. It was a moment for swift thinking, and it is at such moments, as I have already indicated, that Bertram Wooster is at his best. I suddenly remembered that the recent misunderstanding with the Bassett, and, with a flash of clear vision, saw that this was where it was going to come in handy. You've got it all wrong, Tuppy, I said, moving to the left. True, I saw a lot of Angela, but my dealings with her were on the basis of, from start to finish, of the purest and most wholesome camaraderie. I can prove it. During that sojourn in Cannes, my affections were engaged elsewhere. What? Engaged elsewhere? My affections, during that sojourn? I had struck the right note. He stopped sidling. His clutching hand fell to his side. Is that true? Quite official. Who was she? My dear Tuppy, does one bandy a woman's name? One does if one doesn't want one's ruddy head pulled off. I saw that it was a special case. Madeline Bassett, I said. Who? Madeline Bassett? He seemed stunned. You stand there and tell me you were in love with that Bassett disaster. I wouldn't call her that Bassett disaster, Tuppy. Not respectful. That's being respectful. I want the facts. You deliberately assert that you love that weird God help us. I don't see why you would call her a weird God help us either. A very charming, beautiful girl. Odd in some of her views, perhaps. One does not quite see eye to eye with her in the matter of stars and rabbits. But not a weird God help us. Anyway, you stick to it that you were in love with her. I do. It sounds thin to me. So very thin. I saw that it would be necessary to apply the finishing touch. I must ask you that you treat this as entirely confidential, Glossop, but I may as well inform you that it is not 24 hours since she turned me down. Turned you down? Like a bedspread, in this very garden. 24 hours. Call it 25, so you will readily see that I can't be the chap, if any, who stole Angela from you at Cannes. And I was on the brink of adding that I wouldn't touch Angela with a barge pole, when I remembered I had said it already, and it hadn't gone frightfully well. I desisted, therefore. My manly frankness seemed to be producing good results. The homicidal glare was dying out of Tuppy's eyes. He had the aspect of a hired assassin, who had paused to think things over. I see, he said at length. All right, then. Sorry you were troubled. Don't mention it, old man, I responded courteously. For the first time since the bushes had begun to pour forth glossops, Bertram Wooster could be said to have breathed freely. I would say I actually came out from behind the bench, but I did let go of it, and with something of the relief which those three chaps in the Old Testament must have experienced after sliding out of the burning fiery furnace. I even groped tentatively for my cigarette case. At the next moment, a sudden snort made me take my fingers off it as if it had bitten me. I was distressed to note in the old friend a return of the recent frenzy. What the hell do you mean by telling her I used to be covered with ink when I was a kid? My dear Tuppy! I was almost finically careful about my personal cleanliness as a boy. You could have eaten your dinner off me. Quiet, but and all that stuff about having no soul. I'm crawling with soul. And being looked on as an outsider at the drones. But my dear chap, I explained that. It was all in the part of my ruse or scheme. It was it? Well, in future, do me a favor and leave me out of your foul ruses. This isn't really a great book for having a bit of a sneezing fit in the middle. There's a certain flow that is a travesty to break. Just as you say, old boy. Well, then, that's understood. He relapsed into silence, standing with folded arms, staring before her rather like a strong, silent man in a novel when he's been given the bird by the girl and is thinking of looking in at the Rocky Mountains and bumping off a few bears. His manifest pippedness excited my compassion, and I ventured a kindly word. I don't suppose you know what au pied de la lettre means, Tuppy, but that's how I don't think you ought to take all that stuff Angela was saying as just now too much. He seemed interested. What the devil, he asked, are you talking about? I thought that I should have to make myself clearer. Don't take all that guff of hers too literally, old man. You know what girls are like. I do, he said, with another snort that came straight up from his insteps. And I wish I'd never met one. I mean to say it's obvious that she must have spotted you in those bushes, and was simply talking to score off you. There you were, I mean, if you followed the psychology, and she saw you. And in that impulsive way girls have, she seized the opportunity of ribbing you a bit. Just told you a few home truths, I mean to say. Home truths, that's right. He snorted once more, causing me to feel rather like royalty receiving a 21-gun salute from the fleet. I can't remember ever having met a better right and left-hand snorter. What do you mean, home truths? I'm not fat. No. And what's wrong with the colour of my hair? Quite in order, Tuppy, old man. The hair, I mean. And I'm not a bit thin on top. What the dickens are you grinning about? Not grinning, just smiling slightly. I was conjuring up a sort of vision, if you know what I mean. Of you as seen through Angela's eyes. Fat in the middle and thin on the top. Rather funny. You think it's funny, do you? Not a bit. You better not. Quite. It seemed to me that the conversation was becoming difficult again. I wished it could be terminated. And so it was. For at this moment something came shimmering through the laurels in the quiet evenfall, and I perceived that it was Angela. She was looking sweet and saint-like, and she had a plate of sandwiches in her hand. Ham, I was to discover later. If you see Mr. Glossop anywhere, Bertie, she said, her eyes resting dreamily on Tuppy's facade, I wish you would give him these. I am so afraid he may be hungry, poor fellow. It's nearly 10 o'clock, and he hasn't eaten a morsel since dinner. I'll just leave them on this bench. She pushed off, and it seemed to me that I might as well go with her. Nothing to keep me here, I mean. we moved towards the house, and presently, from behind us, there sounded in the night the splintering crash of a well-kicked plate of ham sandwiches, accompanied by the muffled oaths of a strong man in his wrath. "How still and peaceful everything is," said Angela. And that is the end of chapter 15. Well, it almost seems like Bertie salvaged that situation somewhat. At least got Tuppy off of his case. Kind of. At the very end there. But it was a near thing. Dancing around the bench. Peak comedy. Peak comedy. You just kind of see it playing out, right? So, fun mental images. I'm looking forward to finishing this one so that I can go watch the adaptations, because that scene is going to be very good. I just know it. Alright, so let's see. We're actually making very good progress so far tonight. Although, there's a solid jump in... Yeah, it's a very visual gag, right? But it played out very well in the written format. Usually that sort of thing would have like stage directions and you have to like see it coming out as physical comedy. But you can just kind of picture the way the stages are set up in this. And for the most part, it's just standing back and forth banter. So when there's a little bit of physical comedy mixed in, it really plays off very nicely. Alright, so let's go ahead and let's try and get through one more chapter before our break here. Alright, chapter 16. Sunshine was gilding the grounds of Brinkley Court, and the ear detected a marked twittering of birds in the ivy outside the window when I woke the next morning to a new day. But there was no corresponding sunshine in Bertram Wooster's soul, and no answering twitter in his heart as he sat up in bed, sipping his cup of strengthening tea. It could not be denied that, to Bertram, reviewing the happenings of the previous night, the Tuppy-Angela situation seemed more or less to have slipped a cog. With every desire to look for the silver lining, I could not but feel that the rift between these two haughty spirits had now reached such impressive proportions that the task of bridging same would be beyond even my powers. I am a shrewd observer, and there had been something in Tuppy's manner as he booted that plate of ham sandwiches that seemed to tell me that he would not lightly forgive. In these circumstances, I deemed it best to shelve their problem for the nonce, and turn the mind to the matter of Gussie, which presented a brighter picture. With regard to Gussie, everything was in train. Jeeves's morbid scruples about lacing the chap's orange juice had put me to a good deal of trouble, but I had surmounted every obstacle in the old Wooster way. I had secured an abundance of the necessary spirit, and it was now lying in its flask in the drawer of the dressing-table. I had also ascertained that the jug, duly filled, would be standing on a shelf in the butler's pantry round about the hour of 1. To remove it from the shelf, sneak it up to my room, and return it laced in good time for the midday meal would be a task calling, no doubt, for a dress, but in no sense an exacting one. It was with something of the emotions of one preparing a treat for a deserving child that I finished my tea and rolled over for that extra spot of sleep, which just makes all the difference when there is a man's work to be done and the brain must be kept clear for it. And when I came downstairs an hour or so later, I knew how right I had been to formulate this scheme for Gussie's backing up. I ran into him on the lawn, and I could see at a glance that if ever there was a man who needed a snappy stimulant, it was he. All nature, as I have indicated, was smiling, but not Augustus Finknottle. He was walking round in circles, muttering something about not proposing to detain us long, but on this auspicious occasion feeling compelled to say a few words. "Ah, Gussie," I said, arresting him as he was about to start another lap. "A lovely morning, is it not?" Even if I had not been aware of it already, I could have divined from the abruptness with which he damned the lovely morning that he was not in a merry mood. I addressed myself to the task of bringing the roses back to his cheeks. "I've got good news for you, Gussie." He looked at me with a sudden, sharp interest. Has Market Snodbury Grammar School burned down? Not that I know of. Have mumps broken out? Is the place closed on account of measles? No, no. Then what do you mean you've got good news? I endeavoured to soothe. You mustn't take it so hard, Gussie. Why worry about a laughably simple job like distributing prizes at a school? Laughably simple, eh? Do you realize I've been sweating for days and haven't even been able to think of a thing to say yet? Except that I won't detain them long. You bet I won't detain them long. I've been timing my speech. And it lasts 5 seconds. What the devil am I to say, Bertie? What do you say when you're distributing prizes? I considered. Once in my private school, I had won a prize for scripture knowledge, so I suppose I ought to have been full of inside stuff, but memory eluded me. Then something emerged from the mists. You say the race is not always to the swift. Why? Well, it's a good gag. It generally gets a hand. I mean, why isn't it? Why isn't the race to the swift? Ah, there you have me. But the nibs say it isn't. But what does it mean? I take it it's supposed to console the chaps who haven't won prizes. What's the good of that to me? I'm not worrying about them. It's the ones that have won prizes that I'm worrying about. The little blighters who will come up on the platform. Suppose they make faces at me. They won't. How do you know they won't? It's probably the first thing they'll think of. And even if they don't, Bertie, shall I tell you something? What? I've a good mind to take that tip of yours and have a drink. I smiled. He little knew summed up what I was saying. Oh, you'll be all right, I said. He became fevered again. How do you know I'll be all right? I'm sure I'll blow up the lines. Tush! Or drop a prize. Tut! Or something. I can feel it in my bones. As sure as I'm standing here, something is going to happen this afternoon which will make everybody laugh themselves sick at me. I can hear them now, like hyenas, Bertie. Hello. Do you remember the kids' school we went to before Eton? Quite. It was there I won my scripture prize. Never mind about your scripture prize. I'm not talking about your scripture prize. Do you recollect the Bosher incident? I did indeed. It was one of the high spots of my youth. Major General Wilfred Bosher came to distribute the prizes at that school, proceeded Gussie in a dull, toneless voice. He dropped a book. He stooped to pick it up, and as he stooped, his trousers split up the back. How we roared! Gussie's face twisted. We did. Little swine that we were. Instead of remaining silent and exhibiting a decent sympathy for a gallant officer at a peculiarly embarrassing moment, we howled and yelled with mirth. I loudest of any. That is what will happen to me this afternoon, Bertie. It will be a judgment on me for laughing like that at Major General Sir Wilfred Bosher. No, Gussie, old man, your trousers won't split. How do you know they won't? Better men than I have split their trousers. General Bosher was a DSO, with a fine record of service on the northwestern frontier of India, and his trousers split. I shall be a mockery and a scorn, I know it, and you, fully cognizant of what I am in for, came babbling about good news. What news could possibly be good to me at this moment, except the information that bubonic plague has broken out among the scholars at Market Snodsbury Grammar School, and that they are all confined to their beds with spots? The moment had come for me to speak. I laid a hand gently on his shoulder. He brushed it off. I laid it on again. He brushed it off once more. I was endeavouring to lay it on for the third time when he moved aside and desired, with a certain petulance, to be informed if I thought I was a ruddy osteopath. I found this manner trying, but one was to make allowances. I was telling myself that I should be seeing a very different Gussie after lunch. When I said I had good news, old man, I meant about Madeline Bassett. The febrile gleam died out of his eyes, to be replaced by a look of infinite sadness. You can't have good news about her. I've dished myself there completely. Not at all. I am convinced that if you take another whack at her, all will be well. And keeping it snappy, I related what had passed between the Bassett and myself on the previous night. So all you have to do is play a return date, and you cannot fail to swing the voting. You are her dream man. He shook his head. No. What? No use. What do you mean? Not a bit of good trying. But I tell you, she said in so many words, it doesn't make any difference. She may have loved me once last night, will have killed all that. Of course it won't. It will. She despises me now. Not a bit of it. She knows you simply got cold feet. And I should get cold feet again if I tried again. It's no good, Bertie. I'm hopeless. But then there's the end of it. Fate made me the sort of chap who can't say bo to a goose. It isn't a question of saying boo to a goose. The point doesn't arise at all. It is simply a matter of, I know, but it's no good. I can't do it. The whole thing is off. I'm not going to risk a repetition of last night's fiasco. You talk in a light way of taking another whack at her, but you don't know what it means. You have not been through the experience of starting to ask the girl you love to marry you, and then suddenly finding yourself talking like a plum-like external gills of the newly born hoot. It's not a thing you can do twice. No, I accept my destiny. It's all over, and now, Bertie, like a good chap, shove off. I want to compose my speech. I can't compose my speech with you mucking about. If you are going to continue to muck about, at least give me a couple of stories. Little hellhounds are sure to expect a story or two. Do you know the one about no good? I don't want any of your off-colour stuff from the drone smoking room. I need something clean. Something that will be a help to them in their afterlives. Not that I could care a damn about their afterlives, except that I hope they'll all choke. I heard a story the other day, I can't remember it, but it was about a chap who snored and disturbed the neighbours, and it ended, it was his adenoids that annoyed him. He made a very wary gesture. You expect me to work that in, do you? Into a speech to be delivered to an audience of boys, every one of whom is probably riddled with adenoids? Damn it, they'd rush to the platform. Leave me, Bertie. Push off. That's all I ask you to do. Push off. Ladies and gentlemen, said Gussie in a low, soliloquizing sort of way, I do not propose to detain this auspicious occasion long. It was a thoughtful rooster who walked away and left him at it. More than ever, I was congratulating myself on having had the sterling good sense to make all my arrangements so that I could press a button and set things moving at an instant's notice. Until now, you see, I had rather entertained a sort of hope that when I had revealed to him the Bassett's mental attitude, nature would have done the rest, bracing him up to such an extent that artificial stimulants would not be required. Because, naturally, a chap doesn't want to have to sprint about country houses lugging jugs of orange juice, unless it is absolutely essential. But now I saw that I must carry on as planned. The total absence of pep, ginger, and the right spirit which the man had displayed during these conversational exchanges convinced me that the strongest measures would be necessary. Immediately upon leaving him, therefore, I proceeded to the pantry, waited till the butler had removed himself elsewhere, and nipped in and secured the vital jug. A few moments later, after a wary passage of the stairs, I was in my room, and the first thing I saw there was Jeeves, fiddling about with trousers. He gave the jug a look which, wrongly as it was about to turn out, I diagnosed as censorious. I drew myself up a bit. I intended to have no rot from the fellow. Yes, Jeeves? Sir? You have an air of one about to make a remark, Jeeves. Oh, no, sir. I note that you are in possession of Mr. Finknortle's orange juice. I was merely about to observe that, in my opinion, it would be injudicious to add spirit to it. That is a remark, Jeeves, and it is precisely because I have already attended to the matter, sir. What? Yes, sir. I decided, after all, to acquiesce in your wishes. I stared at the man, astounded. I was deeply moved. Well, I mean, I wouldn't any chap who had been going on about thinking that the old feudal spirit was dead and then suddenly found it wasn't have been deeply moved? Jeeves, I said, I am touched. Thank you, sir. Touched and gratified. Thank you very much, sir. But what caused this change of heart? I chanced to encounter Mr. Finknortle in the garden, sir, while you were still in bed, and we had a brief conversation. And you came away feeling that he needed a bracer? Very much so, sir. His attitude struck me as defeatist. I nodded. I felt the same. Defeatist sums it up so nicely. Did you tell him his attitude struck you as defeatist? Yes, sir. But it didn't do any good? No, sir. Very well then, Jeeves. We must act. How much gin did you put in the jug? A liberal tumblerful, sir. A liberal tumblerful, sir. Would that be a normal dose for an adult defeatist, do you think? I fancy it should prove adequate, sir. I wonder. We must not spoil the ship for a ha'porth of tar. I think I'll add just another fluid ounce or so. I would not advocate it, sir. In the case of Lord Brancaster's parrot. You're falling into your old error, Jeeves, of thinking that Gussie is a parrot. Fight against this. I shall add the ounce. Very good, sir. And, by the way, Jeeves, Mr. Finknortle is in the market for bright, clean stories to use in his speech. Do you know any? I know a story about two Irishmen, sir. Pat and Mike? Yes, sir. Who are walking along Broadway? Yes, sir. Just what he wants. Any more? No, sir. Well, every little bit helps. You'd better go and tell it to him. Very good, sir. He passed from the room, and I unscrewed the flask and tilted into the jug a generous modicum of its contents. and scarcely had I done so when there came to my ears the sound of footsteps without. I had only just time to shove the jug behind the photograph of Uncle Tom on the mantelpiece before the door opened, and in came Gussie, curveting like a circus horse. "What ho, Bertie," he said. "What ho, what ho, what ho. And again, what ho. What a beautiful world this is, Bertie. One of the nicest I ever met." I stared at him, speechless. We woosters are as quick as lightning, and I saw at once that something had happened. I mean to say, I told you about him walking around in circles. I've recorded what passed between us on the lawn, and if I portrayed the scene with anything like adequate skill, the picture you will have retained of this think-nottle will have been that of a nervous wreck, sagging at the knees, green about the gills, and picking feverishly at the lapels of his coat in an ecstasy of craven fear. In a word, defeatist. Gussie, during that interview, had, in fine, exhibited all the earmarks of one licked to a custard. Vastly different was the Gussie who stood before me now. Self-confidence seemed to ooze from the fellow's every pore. His face was flushed, there was a jovial light in his eyes, his lips were parted in a swashbuckling smile. And when, with a genial hand, he sloshed me on the back before I could sidestep, it was as if I had been kicked by a mule. "Well, Bertie," he proceeded, as blithely as a linnet without a thing on his mind, "you will be glad to hear that you were right. Your theory has been tested and proved correct. I feel like a fighting cock." My brain ceased to reel. I saw all. "Have you been having a drink?" "I have, as you advised. Unpleasant stuff like medicine. Burns your throat, too. It makes one as thirsty as the dickens. How anyone can mop it up as you do for pleasure beats me. Still, I would be the last to deny that it tunes up the system. I could bite a tiger." "What did you have?"
"Whiskey. At least, that was on the label of the decanter, and I have no reason to suppose that a woman like your aunt, staunch true-blood British, would deliberately deceive the public. If she labels her decanters whiskey, then I consider that we know where we are."
"Whiskey and soda, eh? You couldn't have done better."
"Soda?" said Gussie thoughtfully. "I knew there was something I had forgotten."
"Didn't you put any soda in it?"
"It never occurred to me. I just nipped into the dining room and drank out of the decanter."
"How much?"
"Oh, about 10 swallows. 12, maybe. Or 14. Say, 16 medium-sized gulps. Gosh, I'm thirsty."
"Hold up. Bud, this is going to be great." This is like a freshman that just chugs a fifth. He moved over to the washstand and drank deeply out of the water bottle. I cast a covert glance at Uncle Tom's photograph behind his back. For the first time since it had come into my life, I was glad that it was so large. It hid its secret well. If Gussie had caught sight of that jug of orange juice, he would unquestionably have been onto it with like a knife. "Well, I'm glad you're feeling braced," I said. He moved buoyantly from the washstand and endeavoured to slosh me on the back again. Foiled by my nimble footwork, he staggered to the bed and sat down upon it.
"Priest, did I say I could bite a tiger?"
"You did."
"Make it 2 tigers. I could chew holes in a steel door. What an ass you must have thought me out there in the garden. I see now you were laughing in your sleeve."
"No, no."
"Yes," insisted Gussie, "that very sleeve," he said, pointing, "and I don't blame you. I can't imagine why I made all that fuss about a potty job like distributing prizes at a rotten little country grammar school. Can you imagine, Bertie?"
"No."
"Exactly. Nor can I imagine. There's simply nothing to it. I just shin up to the platform, drop a few gracious words, hand the little blighters the prizes, and hop down again, admired by all. Not a suggestion of split trousers from start to finish. I mean, why should anybody split his trousers? I can't imagine. Can you imagine?"
"No."
"Nor can I imagine. I should be a riot. I just know just the sort of stuff that's needed. Simply manly, optimistic stuff. Straight from the shoulder. This shoulder," said Gussie, tapping. "Why, I was so nervous this morning, I can't imagine. For anything simpler than distributing a few footling books to a bunch of grimy-faced kids, I can't imagine. Still, for some reason I can't imagine, I was feeling a little nervous. But now I feel fine, Bertie. Fine, fine, fine. And I say this to you as an old friend, because that's what you are, old man. When all the smoke is cleared away, an old friend. I don't think I've ever met an older friend. How long have you been an old friend of mine, Bertie?" Oh, years and years. Imagine. Though, of course, there must have been a time when you were a new friend. Hello, the luncheon gone. Come on, let's come on, old friend. And, rising from the bed like a performing flea, he made for the door. I followed rather pensively. What had occurred was, of course, so much velvet, as you might say. I mean, I had wanted a braced Fingnottle. Indeed, all my plans had a braced Fingnottle as their end and aim. But I found myself wondering a little whether the Fingnottle now sliding down the banister wasn't, perhaps, a shade too braced. His demeanour seemed to me that of a man who might quite easily throw bread about, who might quite easily throw bread about a lunch. Fortunately, however, the settled gloom of those round him exercised a restraining effect upon him at the table. It would have needed a far more plastered man to have been rollicking at such a gathering. I had told the Basset that there were aching hearts at Brinkley Court, and it now looked probable that there would probably be aching tummies. Anatole, I learned, had retired to his bed with a fit of the vapours, and the meal now before us had been cooked by the kitchen maid, as C3 a performer as ever wielded a skillet. This, coming on top of their other troubles, induced in the company a pretty unanimous silence. A solemn stillness, as you might say, which even Gussie did not seem prepared to break, except therefore for one short snatch of song on his part. Nothing untoward marked the occasion, and presently we rose, with instructions from Aunt Dahlia to put on festal raiment and be at Market Snodbury not later than 3:30. This, leaving me ample time to smoke a gasper or two at a shady bower beside the lake, I did so, repairing to my room round about the hour of 3. Jeeves was on the job, adding the final polish to the old topper, and I was just about to apprise him of the latest developments in the matter of Gussie, when he forestalled me by observing that the latter had only just concluded an agreeable visit to the Wooster bedchamber. I found Mr. Fingnottle seated here when I arrived to lay out your clothes, sir. Indeed, Jeeves? Gussie was in here, was he? Yes, sir. He left only a few moments ago. He is driving to the school with Mr. and Mrs. Travers in the large car. Did you give him your story of the two Irishmen? Yes, sir. He laughed heartily. Good. Had you any other contributions for him? I ventured to suggest that he might mention to the young gentleman that education is a drawing out, not a putting in. The late Lord Brancaster was much addicted to presenting prizes at schools, and he invariably employed this dictum. And how did he react to that? He laughed heartily, sir. This surprised you, no doubt? This practically incessant merriment, I mean? Yes, sir. You thought it odd in one who, when you last saw him, was well up in Group A of the defeatists? Yes, sir. There is a ready explanation, Jeeves. Since you last saw him, Gussie has been on a bender. He's as tight as an owl. Indeed, sir. Absolutely. His nerve cracked under the strain, and he sneaked into the dining room and started mopping the stuff up like a vacuum cleaner. Whiskey would seem to be what he filled the radiator with. I gather that he used up most of the decanter. Golly, Jeeves, it's lucky he didn't get at that laced orange juice on top of that, what? Extremely, sir. I eyed the jug. Uncle Tom's photograph had fallen into the fender, and it was standing there right out in the open, where Gussie couldn't have helped seeing it. Mercifully, it was empty now. It was a most prudent act on your part, if I may say so, sir, It was a most prudent act on your part, if I may say so, sir, to dispose of the orange juice. I stared at the man. What? Didn't you? No, sir. Jeeves, let us get this clear. Was it not you who threw away that orange juice? No, sir. I assumed, when I entered the room and found the pitcher empty, that you had done so. We looked at each other awed. Two minds with but a single thought. I very much fear, sir. So do I, Jeeves. It would seem almost certain, quite certain. Weigh the facts, sift the evidence. The jug is standing on the mantelpiece for all eyes to behold. Gussie had been complaining of thirst. You found him in here, laughing heartily. I think that there can be little doubt, Jeeves, that the entire contents of that jug are at this moment reposing on top of the existing cargo in that already brilliantly lit man's interior. Disturbing, Jeeves. Most disturbing, sir. Let us face the position, forcing ourselves to be calm. You inserted in that jug, shall we say, a tumblerful of the right stuff? Fully a tumblerful, sir. And I added of my plenty about the same amount. Yes, sir. and in 2 shakes of a duck's tail, Gussie, with all that lapping about inside him, will be distributing the prizes at Market Snodsbury Grammar School before an audience of all that is fairest and most refined in the country.
Yes, sir.
It seems to me, Jeeves, that the ceremony may be one fraught with considerable interest.
Yes, sir.
What, in your opinion, will the halves be?
One finds it difficult to hazard a conjecture, sir.
You mean imagination boggles?
Yes, sir.
I inspected my imagination. He was right. It boggled. And that brings us to the end of chapter 16. So, Gussie is well and goodly sloshed. So not only did he get probably about a fifth worth, at least a pint, probably about a fifth of just straight whiskey in him, he also had 2 tumblerfuls, which is probably about 2 pints of straight gin and orange juice. And this is to someone who, before this, had been entirely sober. Gussie is... yeah, that's... oiled as a diesel train is a good way to put it. He is... wow. This is going to be one for the ages. Alright, let's go ahead and take a few minutes for ourselves to lubricate as necessary. Because this is going to get interesting as we continue on into tonight. I imagine in the 2 chapters or so that we have left to us, things will be off blazing. So, we'll be back in just a little while. Stretch your legs, work out the aches and the creaks, top up your drinks, and we'll be back in just a little while. Alright, we are back. Alright, so let's hope that we are all properly braced, because antics are about to be afoot, I'm certain. But we can't know yet whether it will be continuing to follow along with Gussie and his inebriated expedition, or whether we'll find some other way to find distraction, whether the prize handing or the prize distribution will be the focus here, or whether there will be more other diversions. We must remember that there are probably 3 people that are in dire straits right now, or three pairs that are in dire straits. There's Gussie and Bassett. There's Angela and Tuppy, and there is the aunt and Uncle Tom, all of which have their own fermenting problems. And to just really muddle the mix, Bertie's been giving everyone terrible, terrible advice. So, let's see what the next awaiting disaster is going to be in the works here coming forward. So, let's resume now with Chapter 17. "And yet, Jeeves," I said, twiddling a thoughtful steering wheel, "there is always the bright side." Some 20 minutes had elapsed, and having picked the honest fellow up outside the front door, I was driving in the 2-seater to the picturesque town of Market Snodsbury. Since we had parted, he had to go to his lair and fetch his hat, I to remain in my room and complete the formal costume. I had been doing some close thinking. The results of this I now proceeded to hand on to him. "However dark the prospect may be, Jeeves, however murkily the storm clouds may seem to gather, a keen eye can usually discern the bluebird. It is bad, no doubt, that Gussie should be going some 10 minutes from now to distribute prizes in a state of advanced intoxication, but we must never forget that these things cut both ways." "You imply, sir—" "Precisely. I'm thinking of him in the capacity of wooer. All this ought to have put him in a rare shape for offering his hand in marriage. I shall be vastly surprised if it won't turn him into some sort of caveman. Have you ever seen James Cagney in the movies?" "Yes, sir. Something on those lines." I heard him cough, and sniped him with a sideways glance. He was wearing that informative look of his. "Then you have not heard, sir? Eh? You are not aware that a marriage has been arranged, and will shortly take place, between Mr. Finknottle and Miss Bassett?" "What?" "Yes, sir." "When did this happen?" "Shortly after Mr. Finknottle had left your room, sir." "Ah, in the post-orange juice era?" "Yes, sir." "But are you sure of your facts? How do you know?" "My informant was Mr. Finknottle himself, sir. He appeared anxious to confide in me. His story was somewhat incoherent, but I had no difficulty in apprehending its substance. Prefacing his remarks with a statement that this was a beautiful world, he laughed heartily, and said that he had become formally engaged." "No details?" "No, sir." "But one can picture the scene." "Yes, sir." "I mean, imagination doesn't boggle." "No, sir." "And it didn't? I could see exactly what must have happened. Insert a liberal dose of mixed spirits in a normally abstemious man, and he becomes a force. He does not stand around, twiddling his fingers and stammering. He acts. I had no doubt that Gussie must have reached for the Bassett and clasped her to him like a stevedore handling a sack of coals. And one does readily envisage the effect of that sort of thing on a girl of romantic mind." "Well, well, well, Jeeves." "Yes, sir." "This is splendid news." "Yes, sir." "You see now how right I was." "Yes, sir." "It must have been a rather eye-opener for you, watching me handle this case." "Yes, sir." "The simple, direct method never fails." "No, sir." "Whereas the elaborate does." "Yes, sir." "Righto, Jeeves." We had arrived at the main entrance of Market Snodsbury Grammar School. I parked the car and went in. Well content. Truly, the Tuppy-Angela problem still remained unsolved, and Aunt Dahlia's 500 quid seemed as far off as ever. But it was gratifying to feel that the good old Gussie's troubles were over, at any rate. The grammar school at Market Snodsbury had, I understood, been built somewhere in the year 1416, and, as with many of these ancient foundations, there still seemed to brood over its great hall, where the afternoon's festivities were to take place, not a little of the fug of the centuries. It was the hottest day in the summer, and though somebody had opened a tentative window or two, the atmosphere remained distinctive and individual. In this hall, the youth of Market Snodsbury had been eating its daily lunch for a matter of 500 years, and the flavour lingered. The air was heavy, sort of heavy and languorous, if you know what I mean, with a scent of young England and boiled beef and carrots. Aunt Dahlia, who was sitting with a bevy of local nibs in the second row, sighted me as I entered and waved me to join her. But I was too smart for that. I wedged myself in among the standees at the back, leaning up against a chap who, from the aroma, might have been a corn chandler or something of that order. The essence of strategy on these occasions is to be as near the door as possible. The hall was gaily decorated with flags and coloured paper, and the eye was further refreshed by the spectacle of a mixed drove of boys, parents, and what-not, the former running a good deal of shiny faces and Eton collars, the latter stressing the black satin note rather when female, and looking as if their coats were too tight, if male. And presently there was some applause, sporadic. Jeeves has since told me it was, and I saw Gussie being steered by a bearded bloke in a gown to a seat in the middle of the platform. And I confess that, as I beheld him and felt there was but for the grace of God went Bertram Wooster, a shudder ran through the frame. It all reminded me so vividly of the time I had addressed that girls' school. Of course, looking at it dispassionately, you may say that for horror and peril, there is no comparison between an almost human audience like the one before me and a mob of small girls with pigtails down their backs, and this, I concede, is true. Nevertheless, the spectacle was enough to make me feel like a fellow watching a pal going over Niagara Falls in a barrel. And the thought of what I had expected caused everything for a moment to go black and swim before my eyes. When I was able to see clearly once more, I perceived that Gussie was now seated. He had his hands on his knees and his elbows out at right angles, like a Negro minstrel of the old school about to ask Mr. Bones why a chicken crosses the road. And he was staring before him with a smile so fixed and pebble-beached that I would have thought that anybody could have guessed that there sat one in whom the old familiar juice was splashing up against the back of the front teeth. Okay, that one caught me by surprise. I didn't expect to have to slip in a bit of a censorship in the middle of this, of all things. But we're all full of surprises. In fact, I saw Aunt Dahlia, who, having assisted at so many hunting dinners in her time, is second to none as a judge of the symptoms, give a start and gaze long and earnestly, and she was just saying something to Uncle Tom on her left when the bearded bloke stepped to the footlights and started making a speech. From the fact that he spoke as if he had a hot potato in his mouth without getting the raspberry from the lads in the ringside seats, I deduced that he must be the headmaster. With his arrival in the spotlight, a sort of perspiring resignation seemed to settle on the audience. Personally, I snuggled up against the chandelier and let my attention wander. The speech was on the subject of the doings of the school during the past term, and this part of a prize-giving is always apt to fail to grip the visiting stranger. I mean, you know how it is. You're told that J.V. Brewster has won an exhibition for classics at Cambridge, and you feel that it's one of those stories where you can't see how funny it is unless you really know the fellow. And the same applies to G. Bullitt being awarded the Lady Jane Wick Scholarship at the Birmingham College of Veterinary Science. In fact, I and the corn chandler, who was looking a bit fagged, I thought, as if he had had a hard morning chandling the corn, were beginning to doze lightly when things suddenly brisked up, bringing Gussie into the picture for the first time.
Today, said the bearded bloke, we are all happy to welcome, as the guest of the afternoon, Mr. Fitzwattle.
At the beginning of the address, Gussie had subsided into a sort of daydream. I think it censored you just because of Uncle Tom, which is unfortunate, because I mean that's a literary feature, but it's also understandable because it is a rather frequently used insult. But Google, never stop. At the beginning of the address, Gussie had subsided into a sort of a daydream, with his mouth hanging open. About halfway through, faint signs of life had begun to show, and for the last few minutes he had begun trying to cross one leg over the other, and failing, and having another shot and failing again. But only now did he exhibit any real animation.
He sat up with a jerk.
Think Nottle, he said, opening his eyes. Fitz Nottle? Think Nottle. I should say Think Nottle. Of course you should. You silly ass, said Gussie genially. All right, get on with it.
And closing his eyes, he began trying to cross his legs again. I could see that this little spot of friction had rattled the bearded bloke a bit. He stood for a moment, fumbling at the fungus with a hesitating hand. But they make these headmasters of tough stuff. The weakness passed. He came back nicely and carried on.
We are all happy, I say, to welcome as the guest of the afternoon Mr. Fink Nottle, who has kindly consented to award the prizes. This task, as you know, is one that should have devolved upon that well-beloved and vigorous member of our Board of Governors, the Reverend William Plomer. And we are all, I am sure, very sorry that illness at the last moment should have prevented him from being here today. But if I may borrow a familiar metaphor if I may employ a homely metaphor familiar to you all, what we lose on the swings we gain on the roundabouts.
He paused, and beamed rather freely, to show that this was comedy. I could have told the man it was no use. Not a ripple. The corn chandler leaned against me and muttered,
What did he say?
But that was all. It's always a nasty jar to wait for the laugh and find that the gag hasn't got across. The bearded bloke was visibly discomposed. At that, however, I think he would have got by, had he not, at this juncture, unfortunately stirred Gussie up again.
In other words, though deprived of Mr. Plomer, we have with us this afternoon Mr. Fink Nottle. I am sure that Mr. Fink Nottle's name is one that needs no introduction to you. It is, I venture to assert, a name that is familiar to us all. Not to you, said Gussie.
And the next moment I saw what Jeeves had meant when he had described him as laughing heartily. Heartily was absolutely the mot juste. It sounded like a gas explosion.
You didn't seem to know it so dashed well. What? Said Gussie,
and reminded apparently by the word what of the word wattle. He repeated the latter some 16 times with a rising inflection.
Wattle, he concluded. Righto, push on.
But the bearded bloke had shot his bolt. He stood there, licked at last, and, watching him closely, I could see that he was now at the crossroads. I could spot what he was thinking as clearly as if he had confided it to my personal ear. He wanted to sit down and call it a day, but the thought that gave him pause was that, if he did, he must then either uncork Gussie, or take the Fink Nottle speech as read, and get straight on to the actual prize-giving. It was a dash tricky thing, of course, to have to decide on the spur of the moment. I was reading in the paper the other day about these birds who are trying to split the atom, the nub being that they haven't the foggiest as to what will happen if they do. It may be all right, on the other hand, it may not be all right. And a pretty silly a chap would feel, no doubt, having split the atom. He suddenly found the house going up in smoke, and himself torn limb from limb. So with the bearded bloke. Whether he was abreast of the inside facts in Gussie's case, I don't know, but it was obvious to him by this time that he had run into something pretty hot. Trial gallops had shown that Gussie had his own way of doing things. Those interruptions had been enough to prove on the perspicacious that here, seated on the platform at the big binge of the season, was one who, if pushed forward to make a speech, might let himself go in a rather epoch-making manner. On the other hand, chain him up and put a green baize cloth over him, and where were you? The proceeding would be over about half an hour too soon. It was, as I say, a difficult problem to have to solve, and left to himself, I don't know what conclusion he would have come to. Personally, I think he would have played it safe. As it happened, however, the thing was taken out of his hands, for at this moment, Gussie, having stretched his arms and yawned a bit, switched on that pebble-beached smile again, and tacked down to the edge of the platform.
Speech,
he said affably. He then stood with his thumbs in the armholes of his waistcoat, waiting for the applause to die down. It was some time before this happened, for he had got a very fine hand indeed. I suppose it wasn't often that the boys of Market Snodsbury Grammar School came across a man public-spirited enough to call their headmaster a silly ass, and they showed their appreciation in no uncertain manner. Gussie may have been one over the eight, but as far as the majority of those present were concerned, he was sitting on top of the world.
Boys, said Gussie. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, and boys. I do not detain you long, but I suppose, on this occasion, to feel compelled to say a few auspicious words. Ladies, and boys, and gentlemen, we have all listened with interest to the remarks of our friend here, who forgot to shave this morning. I don't know his name, but then he didn't know mine. Fitzwaddle, I mean, absolutely absurd, which squares things up a bit. And we are all sorry that the Reverend, whatever he was called, should be dying of adenoids. But after all, here today, gone tomorrow, and all flesh is as grass, and whatnot. But that wasn't what I wanted to say. What I wanted to say was this, and I say it confidently, without fear of contradiction. I say, in short, I am happy to be here on this auspicious occasion, and I take such pleasure in kindly awarding the prizes, consisting of the handsome books you see laid out on that table. As Shakespeare says, there are sermons in books, stones in the running brooks, or rather the other way about. And there you have it, in a nutshell.
It went well, and I wasn't surprised. I couldn't quite follow some of it, but anybody could see that it was a real ripe stuff, and I was amazed that even the course of treatment he had been taking could have rendered so normally tongue-tied a dumb brick as Gussie capable of it. It just shows what any member of Parliament would tell you, that if you want real oratory, the preliminary noggin is essential. Unless pie-eyed, you cannot hope to grip.
Gentlemen, said Gussie, I mean, ladies and gentlemen, and, of course, boys, what a beautiful world this is. A beautiful world full of happiness on every side. Let me tell you a little story. Two Irishmen, Pat and Mike, were walking along Broadway, and one said to the other, "Begor, the race is not always to the swift," and the other replied, "Faith and begob, education is a drawing out, not a putting in."
I must say, it seemed to me the rottenest story I had ever heard, and I was surprised that Jeeves should have considered it worth the while shoving into his speech. However, when I taxed him with this later, he said that Gussie had altered the plot a good deal, and I dare say that accounts for it. At any rate, that was the conte as Gussie told it. And when I say that it was a very rough, fair laugh, you will understand what a popular favourite he had become with the multitude. There might be a bearded bloke or so on the platform, and a small section in the second row who were wishing the speaker would conclude his remarks and resume his seat, but the audience as a whole was for him solidly. There was applause, and a voice cried, "Hear, hear!"
Yes, said Gussie, it is a beautiful world. The sky is blue, the birds are singing, there is optimism everywhere. And why not, boys and ladies and gentlemen? I'm happy, you're happy, we're all happy, even the meanest Irishman that walks along Broadway. Though, as I say, there were two of them, Pat and Mike, one drawing out, the other putting in. I should like you boys, taking the time from me, to give 3 cheers for this beautiful world. All together now.
Presently the dust settled down and the plaster stopped falling from the ceiling, and he went on.
People who say it isn't a beautiful world don't know what they're talking about. Driving here in the car today to award the kind prizes, I was reluctantly compelled to tick off my host on this very point. Old Tom Travers. You will see him sitting there in the second row next to the large lady in beige.
He pointed helpfully, and the 100 or so market snoburians who craned their necks in the direction indicated were able to observe Uncle Tom blushing prettily.
I ticked him off properly, the poor fish. He expressed the opinion that the world was in a deplorable state. I said, "Don't talk rot, old Tom Travers. I'm not accustomed to talk rot," he said. Then, for a beginner, I said, "You do it dashed well." And I think you will admit, boys and ladies and gentlemen, that that was telling him.
The audience seemed to agree with him. The point went big. The voice that had said, "Hear, hear," said, "Hear, hear" again, and my corn chandler hammered the floor vigorously with a large-sized walking stick.
"Well, boys,"
resumed Gussie, having shot his cuffs and smirked horribly,
"this is the end of the summer term, and many of you, no doubt, are leaving the school, and I don't blame you, because there's a frost in here you could cut with a knife. You are going out into the great world. Soon, many of you will be walking along Broadway, and what I want to impress upon you is that, however much you may suffer from adenoids, you must use every effort to prevent yourselves becoming pessimists and talking rot like old Tom Travers. There, in the second row, the fellow with a face rather like a walnut."
He paused to allow those wishing to do so to refresh themselves with another look at Uncle Tom, and I found myself musing in a tone in some little perplexity. Long association with the members of the drones had put me pretty well in touch with the various ways in which an overdose of the blushful hypocrisy can take the individual, but I had never seen anyone react quite as Gussie was doing. There was a snap about his work which I had never witnessed before, even in balmy Fotheringhay Phipps on New Year's Eve. Jeeves, when I discussed the matter with him later, said it was something to do with inhibitions, and I caught the word correctly, and the supposition of it. I think he said the ego. What he meant, I gathered, was that, owing to the fact that Gussie had just completed a 5 years' stretch of blameless seclusion among the newts, all the goofiness which ought to have been spread out thin over those 5 years had been bottled up during that period, came out to the surface on this occasion in a lump. Or, if you prefer to put it that way, like a tidal wave. There may be something in this. Jeeves generally knows. Anyway, be that as it may, I was dashed glad I had had the shrewdness to keep out of that second row. It might be unworthy of the prestige of a Wooster to quash in among the proletariat on the standing room only section, but at least I felt I was out of the danger zone. So thoroughly had Gussie got it up his nose by now that it seemed to me that had he sighted me, he might have become personal about even an old school friend.
If there's one thing in the world I can't stand, proceeded Gussie, it's a pessimist. Be optimists, boys. You all know the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. An optimist is a man who, well, take the case of two Irishmen walking along Broadway. One is an optimist, and one is a pessimist. Just as one's name is Pat, and the other's Mike. Well, hello, Bertie. I didn't know you were here.
Too late. I endeavoured to go to earth behind the chandelier, only to discover that there was no chandelier there. Some appointment suddenly remembered, possibly promised to his wife that he would be home to tea, and caused him to ooze away, while my attention was elsewhere, leaving me right out in the open. Between me and Gussie, who was now pointing in an offensive manner, there was nothing but a sea of interested faces looking up at me.
Now there, boomed Gussie, continuing the point, is an instance of what I mean. Boys and ladies and gentlemen, take a good look at that object standing up there at the back. Morning coat, trousers as worn, quiet great tie, and carnation in buttonhole. You can't miss him. Bertie Wooster, that is, and as foul a pessimist as ever bit a tiger. I tell you, I despise that man. And why do I despise him? Because, boys and ladies and gentlemen, he is a pessimist. His attitude is defeatist. When I told him I was going to address you this afternoon, he tried to dissuade me. And do you know why he tried to dissuade me? Because he said my trousers would split up the back.
The cheers that greeted this were the loudest yet. Anything about splitting trousers went straight to the simple hearts of the young scholars of Market Snosbury Grammar School. 2 in the row in front of me turned purple, and a small lad with freckles seated beside them asked me for my autograph.
Let me tell you a story about Bertie Wooster.
A Wooster can stand a great deal, but he cannot stand having his name bandied in a public place. Picking my feet up softly, I was in the very process of executing a quiet sneak for the door when I perceived that the bearded bloke had at last decided to apply the closure. Why he hadn't done so before is beyond me. Spellbound, I take it. And, of course, when a chap is going like a breeze with the public, as Gussie had been, it's not so dashed easy to chip in. However, the prospect of hearing another of Gussie's anecdotes seemed to have done the trick. Rising rather as I had risen from my bench at the beginning of that painful scene with Tuppy in the twilight, he made a leap for the table, snatched up a book, and came bearing down on the speaker. He touched Gussie over the arm, and Gussie, turning sharply and being a large bloke with a beard apparently about to beat him with a book, sprang back in an attitude of self-defence.
Perhaps, as time is getting on, Mr. Finknottle, we had better...
Oh, said Gussie, getting the trend. He relaxed.
The prizes, eh? Oh, yes, right, of course, right-ho. Yes, might as well be shoving along with it. What's this one? Spelling and Dictation, P.K. Purvis. Spelling and Dictation, P.K. Purvis.
Echoed Gussie, as if he were calling the coals.
Forward, P.K. Purvis.
Now that the whistle had been blown on his speech, it seemed to me that there was no longer any need for the strategic retreat which I had been planning. I had no wish to tear myself away unless I had to. I mean, I had told Jeeves that this binge would be fraught with interest, and it was fraught with interest. There was a fascination about Gussie's methods which gripped and made one reluctant to pass the thing up, provided personal innuendos were steered clear of. I decided accordingly to remain, and presently there was a musical squeaking, and P.K. Purvis climbed the platform. The spelling and dictation champ was about 3'6" in his squeaking shoes, with a pink face and sandy hair. Gussie patted his hair. He seemed to have taken immediate fancy to the lad.
You P.K. Purvis.
Sir, yes, sir.
It's a beautiful world, P.K. Purvis.
Sir, yes, sir.
Oh, you've noticed it. Have you? Good. You married by any chance?
Sir, no, sir.
Get married, P.K. Purvis, said Gussie earnestly. It's the only life. Well, here's your book. Looks rather billed to me from a glance at the title page, but such as it is, here you are.
P.K. Purvis squeaked off amidst sporadic applause, but one could not fail to note that the sporadic was followed by a rather strained silence. It was evident that Gussie was striking something of a new note in Market Snodsbury's galactic circles. Looks were exchanged between parent and parent. The bearded bloke had the air of one who has drained the bitter cup. As for Aunt Dahlia, her demeanour now told only too clearly that her last doubts had been resolved, and her verdict was in. I saw her whisper to the Basset, who sat on her right, and the Basset nodded sadly and looked like a fairy about to shed a tear and add another star to the Milky Way. Gussie, after the departure of P.K. Purvis, had fallen into a sort of daydream, and was standing with his mouth open and his hands in his pockets, becoming abruptly aware that a fat-kidded Knickerbockers was at his elbow. He started violently.
"Hello,"
he said, visibly shaken. "Who are you?"
"This,"
said the bearded bloke,
"is R.V. Smethurst." "What's he doing here?"
asked Gussie suspiciously.
"You are presenting him with the drawing prize, Mr. Finknottle."
This apparently struck Gussie as a reasonable explanation. His face cleared.
"That's right, too," he said. "Well, here it is, Cocky. You off?"
he said, as the kid prepared to withdraw. "Sir, yes, sir."
"Wait. R.V. Smethurst, not so fast. Before you go, there's a question I wish to ask you."
But the bearded bloke's aim now seemed to be to rush the ceremonies a bit. He hustled R.V. Smethurst off stage rather like a chucker out of a cab, regretfully ejecting an old and respected customer, and started paging G.G. Simmons. A moment later, the latter was up and coming, and conceive my emotion when it was announced that the subject on which he had clicked was scripture knowledge. One of us, I mean to say. G.G. Simmons was an unpleasant, pesky-looking stripling, mostly front teeth and spectacles, but I gave him a big hand. We scripture knowledge sharks stick together. Gussie, I was sorry to see, didn't like him. There was in his manner, as he regarded G.G. Simmons, none of the chumminess which had marked it during his interview with P.K. Purvis, or in a somewhat lesser degree R.V. Smethurst. It was cold and distant.
"Well, G.G. Simmons."
"Sir, yes, sir."
"What do you mean, sir, yes, sir? Dashed silly thing to say. So you've won the scripture knowledge prize, have you?"
"Sir, yes, sir."
"Yes,"
said Gussie.
"You look just the sort of little tick who would. And yet,"
he said, pausing and eyeing the child keenly,
"how are we to know that this has all been open and above board? Let me test you, G.G. Simmons. What's his name? The chap who begat the thingamy. Can you answer me that, Simmons?"
"Sir, no, sir." Gussie turned to the bearded bloke.
"Fishy," he said. "Very fishy. This boy appears to be totally lacking in scripture knowledge."
The bearded bloke passed a hand across his forehead.
"I can assure you, Mr. Finknottle, that every care was taken to ensure correct marking, and that Simmons outdistanced his competitors by a wide margin." "Well, if you say so," said Gussie doubtfully. "All right, G.G. Simmons, take your prize."
"Sir, thank you, sir."
"But let me tell you, there's nothing to stick on side about in winning a prize for scripture knowledge. Bertie Wooster."
"I don't know when I've had a nastier shock. I'd been going on the assumption that now that they had stopped him making a speech, Gussie's fangs had been drawn, as you might say. To duck my head down and resume my edging toward the door was with me the work of a moment."
Bertie Wooster won the scripture knowledge prize at a kids' school we were at together, and you know what he's like. But, of course, Bertie frankly cheated. He succeeded in scrounging that scripture knowledge trophy over the heads of better men by means of some of the rawest and most brazen swindling methods ever witnessed, even at a school where such things were common. If that man's pockets, as he entered the examination room, were not stuffed to bursting point with lists of the kings of Judah."
I heard no more.
A moment later, I was out in God's air, fumbling with a fevered foot at the self-starter of the old car. The engine raced, the clutch slid into position, and I tooted and drove off. My ganglions were still vibrating as I ran the car into the stables of Brinkley Court, and it was a much-shaken Bertram who tottered up to his room to change into something loose. Having donned flannels, I lay down on the bed for a bit. And I suppose I must have dozed off, but the next thing I remember is finding Jeeves at my side. I sat up. My tea, Jeeves?
No, sir. It is nearly dinner time.
The mists cleared away. I must have been asleep.
Yes, sir.
Nature taking its toll on the exhausted frame.
Yes, sir.
And enough to make it.
Yes, sir.
And now it's nearly dinner time, you say? All right, I am in no mood for dinner, but I suppose you had better lay out the clothes.
It will not be necessary, sir. The company will not be dressing tonight. A cold collation has been set out in the dining room.
Why is that?
It was Mrs. Travers' wish that this should be done in order to minimize the work for the staff, who are attending a dance at Sir Percival Stretchley Budd's residence tonight.
Of course, yes, I remember. My cousin Angela told me. Tonight's the night, what? You going, Jeeves?
No, sir. I am not very fond of this form of entertainment in the rural districts, sir.
I know what you mean. These country binges are all the same. A piano, one fiddle, and a floor like sandpaper. Is Anatole going? Angela hinted not.
Miss Angela was correct, sir. Monsieur Anatole is in bed.
Temperamental blighters, these Frenchmen.
Yes, sir.
There was a pause. Well, Jeeves, I said, it was certainly one of those afternoons, what?
Yes, sir.
I cannot recall one more packed with incident, and I left before the finish.
Yes, sir. I observed your departure.
You couldn't blame me for withdrawing.
No, sir. Mr. Finknortle had undoubtedly become embarrassingly personal.
Was there more of it after I went?
No, sir. The proceedings terminated very shortly. Mr. Finknortle's remarks with reference to Master G.G. Simmons brought about an early closure.
But he had finished his remarks about G.G. Simmons.
Only temporarily, sir. He resumed them immediately after your departure. If you recollect, sir, he had already proclaimed himself suspicious of Master Simmons' bona fides, and he now proceeded to deliver a violent verbal attack upon the young gentleman, asserting that it was impossible for him to have won the Scripture Knowledge Prize without systematic cheating on an impressive scale. He went so far as to suggest that Master Simmons was well known to the police.
Golly, Jeeves!
Yes, sir. The words did create a considerable sensation. The reaction of those present to this accusation I should describe as mixed. The young students appeared pleased and applauded vigorously, but Master Simmons' mother rose from her seat and addressed Mr. Finknortle in terms of strong protest.
Did Gussie seem taken aback? Did he recede from his position?
No, sir. He said that he could see it all now, and hinted at a guilty liaison between Master Simmons's mother and the headmaster, accusing the latter of having cooked the marks, as his expression was, in order to gain favour with the former.
You don't mean that?
Yes, sir.
Egad, Jeeves! And then?
They sang the national anthem, sir.
Surely not.
Yes, sir.
At a moment like that?
Yes, sir.
Well, you were there and you know, of course, but I should have thought that the last thing Gussie and this woman would have done in circumstances would have been to start singing duets.
You misunderstand me, sir. It was the entire company who sang. The headmaster turned to the organist and said something to him in a low tone, upon which the latter began to play the national anthem, and the proceedings terminated.
I see. About time, too.
Yes, sir. Mrs. Simmons' attitude has become unquestionably menacing.
I pondered. What I had heard was, of course, of a nature to excite pity and terror, not to mention alarm and despondency, and it would be paltering with the truth to say that I was pleased about it. On the other hand, it was all over now, and it seemed to me that the thing to do was not to mourn over the past, but to fix the mind on the bright future. I mean to say, Gussie might have lowered the existing Worcester record for goofiness and indefinitely forfeited all chance of becoming Market Snodbury's favourite son, but you couldn't get away from the fact that he had proposed to Madeline Bassett, and you had to admit that she had accepted him. I put this to Jeeves. A frightful exhibition, I said, and one which will very possibly ring down history's pages. But we must not forget, Jeeves, that Gussie, though now doubtless looked upon in the neighbourhood as the world's worst freak, is all right otherwise.
No, sir.
I did not quite get this. When you say, no, sir, do you mean, yes, sir? No, sir. No, sir.
He is not all right otherwise?
No, sir.
But he's betrothed.
No longer, sir. Miss Bassett has severed the engagement.
You don't mean that?
Yes, sir.
I wonder if you have noticed a rather peculiar thing about this chronicle. I allude to the fact that at one time or another practically everybody playing a part in it has had occasion to bury his or her face in his or her hands. I have participated in some pretty glutinous affairs in my time, but I think that never before or since have I been mixed up with such a solid body of brow clutchers. Uncle Tom did it, if you remember, so did Gussie, so did Tuppy, so probably, though I have no idea, did Anatole, and I wouldn't have put it past Bassett, and Aunt Dahlia. I have no doubt would have done it too, but for the risk of disarranging the carefully fixed coiffure. Well, what I'm trying to say is that at this juncture I did it myself. Up went the hands and down went the head, and in another jiffy I was clutching as energetically as the best of them. And it was while I was still massaging the coconut and wondering what the next move was, that something barged up against the door like the delivery of a ton of coals.
I think this may very possibly be Mr. Finknortle himself, sir,
said Jeeves. His intuition, however, had led him astray. It was not Gussie, but Tuppy. He came in, stood breathing asthmatically. It was plain he was deeply stirred. And that brings us to the end of chapter 17, and the end of the gift, or the prize giving. And it was every bit as fantastic as we had expected. There's only so many ways that it can play out when you put a fantastically drunken man before a room of children. The mental images that puts forth just dance behind the eyes. So, we're starting to run short on time as far as, like, what's left in the book for things to come to a proper resolution. And I have to wonder how things will shape up. Because Gussie has had his ups and his downs now. And presumably, as soon as he gets over the oncoming hangover of biblical proportions, is going to be a right mess, given that his very quickly approved and dissolved betrothal has fallen to pieces. And yeah, it is impressive how fast that can go poorly. And actually, I can't put this entirely on Bertie this time. Like, he tried to hide the orange juice and undo it when he heard that Gussie was already well and goodly lubed up. So, I can't really put that entirely on Bertie's plate. He did put the idea in his head, but if he'd stopped at just the whiskey, it might have been okay. But to double down with the gin and juice, that is a recipe for disaster. It's good, but a recipe for disaster nonetheless. So, we've got enough time in here for one more chapter tonight, and that'll put us right at about the 3/4 mark, which is right on pace for where we want to be for this book. We'll be able to finish up tomorrow. So, let's continue to see how poorly things can shape up, because now Tuppy's in the mix. And when we last left Tuppy, things were at least at a stable point, which means from now on, well, right now, it's probably going to collapse into an absolute debacle. Because we have to hit rock bottom, right? And we're about at time to hit rock bottom properly. Everyone must be pissed off. The knives come out. So, let's see what happens next in chapter 18. I eyed him narrowly. I didn't like his looks. Mark you, I don't say I ever had much, because nature, when planning this sterling fellow, shoved in a lot more lower jaw than was absolutely necessary, and made the eyes a bit too keen and piercing for one who was neither an empire builder nor a traffic policeman. But on the present occasion, in addition to offending the aesthetic sense, this glossop seemed to me to be wearing a distinct air of menace. And I found myself wishing that Jeeves wasn't always so dashed tactful,
I mean, it's all very well to remove yourself like an eel sliding into mud when the employer has a visitor, but there are moments when it looked to me as if this was going to be one of them, when the true tact is to stick round and stand ready to lend a hand in the free-for-all. But Jeeves was no longer with us. I hadn't seen him go, and I hadn't heard him go, but he had gone. As far as the eye could reach, one noted nobody but Tuppy, and in Tuppy's demeanour, as I say, there was a certain something that tended to disquiet. He looked to me very much like a man who had come to reopen the matter of my tickling Angela's ankles. However, his opening remark told me that I had been alarming myself unduly. It was of a pacific nature, and came as a great relief. "Bertie," he said, "I owe you an apology. I've come to make it." My relief on hearing these words, containing, as they did, no reference to any sort of tickle ankles, was, as I say, great. But I don't think it was any greater than my surprise. Months had passed since that painful episode at the drones, and until now he hadn't given a sign of remorse or contrition. Indeed, word had reached me through private sources that he frequently told the story at dinners and other gatherings, and, when doing so, laughed his silly head off. I found it hard to understand, accordingly, but what could have caused him to abase himself at this later date? Presumably, he had been given the elbow by his better self, but why? Still, there it was. "My dear chap," I said gentlemanly to the gills, "don't mention it." "What's the sense of saying don't mention it? I have mentioned it. I mean, don't mention it any more. Don't give the matter another thought. We all of us forget ourselves sometimes and do things which, in our calmer moments, we regret. No doubt you were a bit tight at the time." "What the devil do you think you're talking about?" I didn't like this tone. Brusque. "Correct me if I'm wrong," I said with certain stiffness, "but I assumed you were apologizing for your foul conduct in looping back the last ring that night in the drones. Caused me to plunge into the swimming bath in the full soup and fish." "That's not that at all." "Then what?" "This Bassett business." "What Bassett business?" "Bertie," said Tuppy, "when you told me last night that you were in love with Madeline Bassett, I gave you the impression that I believed you, but I didn't. The thing seemed too incredible. However, since then I have made inquiries, and the facts appear to square with your statement. I have now come to apologize for doubting you." "Made inquiries?" "I asked her if you had proposed to her, and she said yes, you had." "Tuppy, you didn't." "I did." "Have you no delicacy? No proper feeling?" "No." "Oh, well, right-ho, of course, but I think you ought to have." "Delicacy be dashed! I wanted to be certain that it was not you who stole Angela from me, and now I know it wasn't." So long as he knew that, I didn't so much mind him having no delicacy. "Ah," I said, "well, that's fine. Hold the thought." "I found out who it was." "What?" He stood brooding for a moment. His eyes were smouldering with a dull fire. His jaw stuck out like the back of Jeeves's head. "Bertie," he said, "do you remember what I swore I would do to the chap who stole Angela from me?" "As nearly as I can recall, you planned to pull him inside out and make him swallow himself. Correct. The program still holds good." "But Tuppy, I keep assuring you, as a competent eyewitness, that nobody snitched Angela from you during that can strip." "No, but they did after she got back." "What?" "Don't keep saying what. You heard." "But she hasn't been seen anybody since she got back." "Oh no. How about that Newt bloke?" "Gussie?" "Precisely. The serpent Finknottle." This seemed to me absolute gibbering. "But Gussie loves Bassett." "You can't all love this blighted Bassett. What astonishes me is that anyone can do it. He loves Angela, I tell you, and she loves him." "But Angela handed you your hat before Gussie ever got here." "No, she didn't. A couple of hours after." He couldn't have fallen in love with her in a few hours." "Why not? I fell in love with her in a couple of minutes. Worshipped her immediately we met, the pop-eyed little excrescence." "But dash it, don't argue, Bertie. The facts are all docketed. She loves this Newt-nuzzling blister." "Quite absurd, laddie, quite absurd." "Oh?" He ground his heel into the carpet, a thing I've often read about, but never seen done before. "Then perhaps you will explain how it is that she happens to come to be engaged to him." "What? You could have knocked me down with a fart." "Engaged to him?" "She told me herself."
"She was kidding you."
"She was not kidding me. Shortly after the conclusion of this afternoon's binge at Market Snodsbury Grammar School, he asked her to marry him, and she appears to have right-hoed without a murmur.
There must be some mistake.
There was. The snake Finknottle made it, and by now I bet he realizes it. I have been chasing him since 5:30.
Chasing him?
All over the place. I want to pull his head off.
I see. Quite.
You haven't seen him by any chance?
No.
Well, if you do, say goodbye to him quickly and put in your order for lilies. Oh, Jeeves.
Sir? I hadn't heard the door open, but the man was on the spot once more. My private belief, as I think I have mentioned before, is that Jeeves doesn't have to open doors. He's like one of those birds in India who bung their astral bodies about. The chaps, I mean, who, having gone into thin air in Bombay, reassemble the parts and appear 2 minutes later in Calcutta. Only some such theory will account for the fact that he's not there one moment and is there the next. He just seems to float from spot A to spot B like some form of gas.
Have you seen Mr. Finknottle, Jeeves?
No, sir.
I'm going to murder him.
Very good, sir. Tuppy withdrew, banging the door behind him, and I put Jeeves abreast. Jeeves, I said, do you know what? Mr. Finknottle is engaged to my cousin Angela.
Indeed, sir.
Well, how about it? Do you grasp the psychology? Does it make sense? Only a few hours ago he was engaged to Miss Bassett.
Gentlemen who have been discarded by one young lady are often apt to attach themselves without delay to another, sir. It is what is known as a gesture.
I began to grasp. I see what you mean. Defiant stuff.
Yes, sir.
A sort of, oh, right-ho, please yourself, but if you don't want me, there are plenty who do.
Precisely, sir. My cousin George.
Never mind about your cousin George, Jeeves.
Very good, sir.
Keep him for the long winter evenings, what?
Just as you wish, sir.
And anyway, I bet your cousin George wasn't a shrinking, non-goose-booing jellyfish like Gussie. That's what astounds me, Jeeves. That it should be Gussie who's been putting in all this heavy gesture-making stuff.
You must remember, sir, that Mr. Finknottle is in a somewhat inflamed cerebral condition.
That's true. A bit above par at the moment, as it were.
Exactly, sir.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. He'll be in a jolly sight more inflamed cerebral condition if Tuppy gets hold of him. What's the time?
Just on 8 o'clock, sir.
Then Tuppy has been chasing him for 2 hours and a half. We must save the unfortunate blighter, Jeeves.
Yes, sir.
A human life is a human life, what?
Exceedingly true, sir.
The first thing, then, is to find him. After that, we can discuss plans and schemes. Go forth, Jeeves, and scour the neighbourhood.
It will not be necessary, sir. If you will glance behind you, you will see Mr. Finknottle coming out from beneath your bed.
And, Jove, he was absolutely right. There was Gussie, emerging as stated. He was covered in fluff and looked like a tortoise popping forth for a bit of a breather. Gussie, I said.
Jeeves,
said Gussie.
Sir,
said Jeeves.
Is that door locked, Jeeves?
No, sir, but I will attend to the matter immediately. Gussie sat down on the bed, and I thought for a moment that he was going to be in the mode by burying his face in his hands. However, he merely brushed a dead spider from his brow.
Have you locked the door, Jeeves? Yes, sir, because you can never tell that ghastly Glossop may not take it into his head to come.
The word back froze on his lips. He hadn't got any further than a B-ish sound when the handle of the door began to twist and rattle. He sprang from the bed, and for an instant stood looking exactly like a picture my Aunt Agatha has in her dining room, the Stag at Bay, a Landseer. Then he made a dive for the cupboard, and was inside it before he really got onto it that he had started leaping. I've seen fellows late for the 9:15 move less nippily. I shot a glance at Jeeves. He allowed his right eyebrow to flicker slightly, which is as near as he ever gets to a display of the emotions. "Hello," I yipped.
"Let me in, blast you!" responded Tuppy's voice from without. "Who locked this door?"
I consulted Jeeves once more in the language of the eyebrow. He raised one of his. I raised one of mine. He raised his other. I raised my other. Then we both raised both. I love that. Finally, there seemed no other policy to pursue. I flung wide the gates, and Tuppy came shooting in. "Now what?" I said, as nonchalantly as I could manage.
"Why was the door locked?"
demanded Tuppy. I was in pretty good eyebrow-raising form by now, so I gave him a touch of it. "Is one to have no privacy, Glossop?" I said coldly. "I instructed Jeeves to lock the door because I was about to disrobe."
"A likely story," said Tuppy, "and I'm not sure he didn't add forsooth." You needn't try to make me believe that you're afraid people are going to run excursion trains to see you in your underwear. You locked that door because you got that snake-fake novel concealed in here. I suspected it the moment I left, and I decided to come back and investigate. I'm going to search this room from end to end. I believe he's in that cupboard. What's in this cupboard?
Just clothes, I said, having another stab at the nonchalant, though extremely dubious as to whether it would come off. The usual wardrobe of the English gentleman paying a country house visit.
You're lying.
Well, I wouldn't have been if he had only waited a minute before speaking, because the words were hardly out of his mouth before Gussie was out of the cupboard. I half commented on the speed with which he had gone in. It was as nothing to the speed with which he had merged. There was a sort of whir and blur, and he was no longer with us. I think Tuppy was surprised. In fact, I'm sure he was. Despite the confidence with which he had stated his view that the cupboard contained Fingnottles, it plainly disconcerted him to have the chap fizzing out at him like this. He gargled sharply and jumped back about 5 feet. The next moment, however, he had recovered his poise and was galloping down the corridor in pursuit. It only needed Aunt Dolly after them shouting "Yoicks!" or whatever is customary on these occasions to complete the resemblance to a brisk run with the corn. I sank into a handy chair. I am not a man whom it is easy to discourage, but it seemed to me that things had at last begun to get too complex for Bertram. "Jeeves," I said, "all this is a bit thick."
"Yes, sir."
"The head rather swims."
"Yes, sir."
"I think you had better leave me, Jeeves. I shall need to devote the very closest thoughts to the situation which has arisen."
"Very good, sir."
The door closed. I lit a cigarette and began to ponder. And that is the end of chapter 18. And so, we are right on pace, actually. It's just about 10 o'clock. We've got 1/4 of the book left, and one more day ahead of us, and we are perfectly on schedule. It is very, very nice when things just sort of work together like this. Of course, unfortunately for our characters, things are not working together quite so nicely. The fact that Gussie took it upon himself to propose to Angela while blisteringly intoxicated, and that she accepted, floored the both of us, I'm certain. Wow. And then Tuppy is understandably upset with everything. If I hadn't heard that Gussie had proposed, I would have thought that he was out of his right mind, but apparently not. There might be something there to this. So, this is all very, very interesting. And we were right when we expected that things were going to get worse before they started to get better. And we thought the prize giving was the bottom, the absolute bedrock of things. But no. Somehow, things have gotten worse. And I stand by the fact that while Bertie is probably in the running for one of the worst characters that we've read, I still like him. I think it's just by the nature of because this is a comedy, you expect people to be kind of awful and things to just sort of work out. So it is a redeeming trait there. It also helps that he's kind of dim, but he's very quickly ascending the ranks of actual awful people, but he's just so damn lovable. Yeah, I expected things to go poorly. I expected things to go twisty and sideways and in and out and have complications and a tangled knot of things. But each of the twists that we've had so far have absolutely floored me. This last one being the funniest, or the most shocking anyway. The absolutely plastered Gussie was peak fiction. Yeah, I think that's probably spot on. The nature of comedy is like, you need bad characters, you need bad people to be able to play off of that. Half of comedy is pain, honestly. So it's understandable. It's expected. But it does make us wonder, as bad as things are getting, how is it going to work out? I know that Jeeves is gonna somehow magic this into position. Somehow, behind the scenes, despite all of Bertie's ill-given advice and schemes and plots, somehow everything will just work out. The magazine will be funded. The money owed to the taxman will be found. The engagements will be mended. Either, maybe not with their original people, but maybe the four involved will be successfully paired off. I have a feeling that that's going to work out. And at the end of the day, Bertie will think that he's the hero, and everyone else will know that it was Jeeves. I have a feeling that's how it's going to play out. But how it's going to get there is, you're right, it's going to be some Sherlock tier nonsense. It's going to be some sort of deduction and very liberal twisting of the truth and facts that we never would have seen, that are entirely implausible, but will make sense as it plays out. But the how is where things are important. And it is hilarious that a comedy is every bit as mysterious and thought-provoking as Sherlock or going after Poirot. I love it. So, let's go ahead and wrap up here for tonight, and we'll be back tomorrow for the conclusion of Righto, Jeeves. I'm very excited to see how this shapes out, and I think it will live up to the expectations, because so far it has not failed to deliver at all. Every day has been spot on, and I think it will continue to be so. So, until then, let's try and keep our excitement in check, because things are probably going to get even better in the last few chapters tomorrow night. Until then, thank you very much for joining us. If you haven't yet, I encourage you to put a like on the stream and maybe subscribe to the channel. Let us know that we're doing some fun things. And then, we'll be back tomorrow. Good night.